Okay, so try to take a couple of minutes and finish this up. Remember to make sure that you're using complete sentences and you're using the evidence from the text. So as you guys are finishing up the last few parts here, let's just recap on where you are at with each of your songs. So every table had a different song, so we'll talk about maybe one of the easier songs first. So we have Tim McGraw by Taylor Swift. So when we think of Taylor Swift, a lot of times we automatically think of love. It's all about love. But in the song Tim McGraw, what was she actually saying about love? Okay, when we leave that love situation, it doesn't always have to be a negative. So the theme here, what she wants you to pull out of life, is that it doesn't always have to end and be forever horrible. So sometimes we can take the positive out of that love and that relationship, and we can continue on with that. So we don't have to hate that person. We can, and it's really, really hard not to sometimes, but we don't always have to. We can think of the positive stuff instead of thinking of the negative stuff. Good. So let's go to Church. Take Me to Church. So Take Me to Church by Hosier. What is the theme there?
Not a new song.
It's a newer song. Mm-hmm. Played a lot at my wedding. Yeah. So what is the theme of the song?
No, we have an opinion.
Okay, so we have a couple of different opinions here, which is awesome. So let's talk about what one of those perspectives is. So Jade, you want to go first?
Religious corruption.
Okay, so Jade thinks it's about religious corruption. And why do you think it's about religious corruption?
There's multiple things in the song that mentions different religions and sacrifices and how they're telling them they're bad. And basically talking about killing them.
Okay, so ending certain religions and talking about the corruption that is involved with a lot of religion. There's a lot of corruption that's involved. So the other take on it was, Laura?
A relationship we have.
Okay. And why do you think it's a relationship?
Well, I mean, it starts off by saying my lover's got humor, so that just like makes me think of a relationship right there. Okay. And I think that he's using some of the church and religious metaphors for his relationship.
Okay. So this is the great thing about English and the thing that really stinks about English. It's up to your interpretation, but if you have evidence that supports one way or another, use the evidence. Because you're not going to be wrong if you're using the evidence. The thing I want you to remember is using the exact evidence. So pulling that line, my lover's got humor. So pulling that line directly from the text is what you're going to have to use to prove your point. But remember that when we talked about your format, you start with a claim. So your claim could be that the theme is about a relationship. So there's a relationship there, and we would have to refine that a little bit more. Our evidence is going to come directly from the text. So it could be that first line, my lover's got humor. Now, that sitting by itself doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right.
So we have to add in that reasoning that says, this is why I'm connecting this to that claim. So if your claim is that the theme is about love, about relationships, Okay, your evidence is my lover's. Gotta get this line. My lover's got humor. Okay, you guys are gonna remember it before I do. And then the reasoning connects why that shows that initial claim to be true. And then you continue to pile that on, because the more that you pile on, the more you're going to help your reader relate to that. So let's look at our last song. Am I wrong? Don't tell me I'm wrong. But Am I Wrong is by, I don't know what their names are.
Nico and
Okay, so what's the theme of this piece?
it's talking about, from what it sounds like to me, that they don't agree with other people's things.
Basically, yeah, like, is he wrong for like the way that he think? I mean, like the way he feels.
Is he wrong for trying to achieve his goal?
Okay, so you have the words goals there. So is he wrong for trying to reach for his dreams and to reach for his goals? So what evidence do you have from the piece that tells that?
He said, I ain't trying to do everything else. I mean, he said, I ain't trying to do what everyone else is doing. And then he said, for thinking we could be something for real.
We're trying to reach the things that I can see.
Good.
Just many reasons why.
There are a lot of lines in there that we can pull that says, hey, this is why he says he's trying to achieve his goals. He doesn't want to be like everybody else. So he doesn't necessarily want to be in trouble like all the other artists. Maybe he wants a different goal. Maybe he wants a family. Maybe he wants to tour less because he wants to focus on this instead. But people are maybe telling him these other things. So instead, he wants to do what's going to make him happy. So the theme is do what makes you happy. That's what we're drawing from life. Good. Any questions over theme before we add a couple other pieces to this? Nope. So keep these out because we're going to be using these here in just a few minutes again. But before we get on to that, you guys ready?
Yeah.
Before we move on to that, we're going to focus on a couple of terms today. So get that literary term sheet out. Make sure you have the literary term sheet out. And we're going to add a couple of terms to that. In addition to the terms that we're going to add to that, we are going to focus today on ancient Greece. We're going to talk about your perceptions of Greece, what you think about Greece right now, and then we're going to change that. We're going to look at what Greece actually is like, and some of the things that we got from ancient Greece. So we'll look at all of those pieces today. And then we're going to focus on a few literary concepts as we work through the vocabulary. So you need that vocabulary term sheet that I gave you yesterday. You're going to be referencing that quite a bit, so make sure that you keep hold of that. If you need the words, grab those from someone else later. Don't worry about those right now. Grab those later. So we're going to focus on a couple of vocabulary words. And I got super geeked out because Laura said one of them. So bumped up. Yay. So when Laura was talking about her piece, she used the word metaphor. So on the back side of your vocabulary term sheet, you're going to see the word metaphor. It's about 4 down. So a metaphor is what? What's a metaphor?
Doesn't it give describes?
Okay, it's doing something. It's comparing two things, but it's a direct comparison. So it's not using like or as. That would be a simile. Well, we're going to get to that one here in a minute. So my husband, if I say he's a bear, he's not physically a bear. I didn't marry a bear. So what does that mean about him?
Might be hairy.
He is big. He is hairy. He's grouchy.
Like,
David knows. He's grouchy. So he has all of those characteristics of a bear. He's not really a bear. So we're using a comparison. It's a direct comparison. So in your novels, you guys have some direct comparisons. So Brian is comparing a few things. Malcolm X is comparing some things. We have Pony Boy and Johnny comparing some things. We also have Ellie. He's talking a lot about the conditions, and he's comparing the conditions to different things. So a metaphor is going to be a direct comparison. So give yourself an example on the second line. Write an example of what a metaphor is. So give yourself an example. So if you want to say that you are like, or you're something, then you can do that. If you want to use one of your characters from the novel, then you can say that. If you say my husband is a bear, your husband better be a bear. So use a comparison that is going to help you remember that. So use an example there.
My kids like Minnie and me.
Yeah, make it like Minnie. Not like any version of you, but kind of. So right above that is a simile. So a simile is a comparison using like or as. So if I said my husband's a bear, that gives you the impression that he's hairy, that he's grouchy, that he's big. But if I said he's like a bear, you're coming up maybe with the same assumptions, but the simile is going to rely on other description. Oftentimes that relies on other description. So a simile is a comparison using like or as. So if I said Mountain Dew is like acid running down your throat, not really acid running down your throat. So give yourself an example of a simile. I like to make comparisons to things so I can remember them. When you're trying to remember the difference between a simile and a metaphor, if any of you grew up with Valley Girls, like they always like said like all the liking time. So I think of smiling, and because they smile a lot, so simile looks like smile, and they use like or as.
And disguise is sure.
Yes, good.
Maybe not that one.
We're pretty close to it, but you don't have to go into all those details. So this guy is like Alvin's shirt, the color of Alvin's shirt. Good.
I'm like Skittles. Taste the rainbow.
Not quite a rainbow of colors.
Oh, what you mean?
Okay, well, yeah.
Take some.
So right above that is the word analogy. Oftentimes when you guys get standardized tests, you're going to see find the analogy. So when we're finding an analogy, we're looking at the relationship amongst things. So it could be a comparison. It could be a different type of relationship. So for analogy, that's a direct relationship. So you can write a direct relationship. So if I said Alaska is to a map as words are to a...
Like a teacher to a classroom
You
as
said
a
direct
part of the road.
relationship.
Yes, direct relationship. So Alaska is on a map, so words are on paper, a book, something like that. So you have to show there's a direct relationship amongst those things, but you have to know what those things are in order to know what that initial relationship is and then continue that on. You're going to see that quite a bit when you guys get to standardized testing. You're going to see those things. Got a question, guys? What's that?
Direct relationship.
direct relationship. Any questions on the vocab? So far we have theme, moral, simile, and metaphor. Those are your vocab words so far this week. A couple of other things before we move on. I did go ahead and go in and try to change my YouTube channel. So you guys would see it was Mrs. Warner. But that didn't quite work out for me for a lot of reasons. So if you want to access the videos for the class, you have to access my maiden name, which is Martha. Don't make fun of my last name. Boer. Bug her. Bug her. That's my maiden name. So if you're searching YouTube, so you can look at the amazing teaching videos or my husband's driving, because those are the only two things I have on the YouTube channel, it's Martha Boer. Any questions so far? All right, let's get to ancient Greece. So I like to look at things in relation to others. So I wanted to give you guys a map of ancient Greece so you could see where ancient Greece was. It's very similar to where it is now, but there are a few things that have changed. So we're going to talk a little bit about those things that have changed. So in ancient Greece, we took this very large area. This very large area was Greece. Macedonia is up here. There are a few other places around here. And down here, we have another part of Greece. So we've got this little island over here, and then we have this bigger area. The two places that we're really going to be dealing with over the next few days are Sparta and Athens. We're also going to be talking quite a bit about Olympus and Thebes, but we're focusing on Athens and Sparta for the next bit. You guys see? You can see them?
Yeah.
So Athens is right up here, and it's surrounded by water. So what do you think that means about Athens?
It's pretty isolated.
Isolated what?
Not a lot of resources.
Okay, let's think about resources. How do you think resources came into places?
Ocean.
Okay, so they're surrounded by water, so they probably have access to certain resources. Resources that are going to come from other countries. What about Sparta? It's got this little bitty piece of water right here. So let's think about Sparta. So what do you think about Sparta being on mostly land?
It's on mostly land. It can get a lot of things from the land, but it also, if it wants things from the mainland, it has that little bit with
Okay.
and if it wants things from anywhere else, it has to go through water.
So it's fairly far away from all of these ports of water. You have to get through a lot of land. But you said you hit the nail on the head here. So Sparta uses land, and they use the physical resources that are from the land. Whereas Athens is really surrounded by a lot of water. So they're going to use a lot of exporting and importing. So they're going to have a lot of stuff coming in and out that is different from them. So Sparta is going to have to rely more on what is around there. So just like in Hatchet, Brian is forced to live off of the land. Spartans are going to be forced to live off the land. In Night, they're all over the place. So they have to become accustomed to their surroundings. So in Athens, they have to become accustomed to their surroundings. Good. And just to give you an idea of what it looks like now, remember I told you my friend Leo, he just got back from Greece. Actually, he just got back last night from Iceland. So he's going to give me some pictures, so we'll look at it. But just to give you an idea of what Greece looks like now, it's very similar. They've kind of taken over a few more islands that are surrounding. So instead of, they have all control over all of these islands here. And it goes up. It goes up, but not necessarily in the same as far up as it used to. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at a video about ancient Greece. But before we get to that, I want to kind of gauge what your impressions are of Greece. So when you think of Greece, the country, not the stuff. When you think of Greece, what do you think of?
Now or back then?
Now, or back then, either one.
Well, right now they're having some money problems.
Okay, so they have some money issues. What else?
When I think of Greek, I just think of like ancient culture. Like, that's what I think about.
Well, you don't really hear about new culture about it.
Okay, Jason, what did you say?
Like, their gods and goddesses and
Good.
like different types of cultures.
Okay, so a lot about culture. Now, what do you mean, Alvin, by culture? What are you talking about that?
Like wars, like ancient time stuff, and like maybe like different specifics of each place. Like you hear about like pyramids and stuff like that, and like like it's certain things you hear about, like you hear Greece, like that's why I think of like ancient like type of pyramids and like
Okay.
King Tut and like all those like that's what they still talk about till today.
Okay, so is that Greece or is that Egypt?
I mean it's Egypt, but like I mean like.
But you were talking a lot about the structures. So we're talking about the structures specifically, and we're actually going to dive into that a little bit more. So structures. They had a lot of structures. What kind of structures did they have? They didn't necessarily have the pyramids, but what kind of structures do they have in Greece? Okay.
But I have like
Well, a place in Italy that we avoided called Pisa.
don't
And they have a
like,
mini one in
sculptures?
Venice
Don't
too.
they have like sculptures and stuff?
They do. They have a lot of art. Yeah. And they have a lot of that in Italy as well. When we talk about Greece, a lot of times people combine Greek and Roman culture. Because the two countries were really close and because they share a lot of the same cultural aspects, there are gods and goddesses for Greeks and there are gods and goddesses for Romans. They are essentially the same gods and goddesses, but Greeks will no, they are called this. And the Romans, no, they are called this. So they have a lot of the same areas or a lot of the same ideas, but if you're Greek, it's one way. If you're Roman, it's another way. So because they're two different countries, there was a lot of conflict between the two countries. There was a lot of internal conflict in Greece, and that's what we're going to focus on today. So when we think of the culture, we think of the architecture. Sometimes you may think of the Colosseums, and somebody mentioned the art. So you're going to see art as well. So what do you think of people of Greece? David?
I think like the guys who are like scholars and all that.
Good. Scholars. And where do you get that?
Like Plato.
So where did you learn about Plato? That makes me super happy, by the way. Where did you hear about that?
Some people don't hear about it. They experience it. A lot of people don't.
So, where do you experience Plato and the scholars of Greek culture?
Philosophy.
Okay, so where did you hear about the philosophy?
Science and 8th grade.
Okay, where?
Science and 8th grade.
Okay, so you may hear about it in school. You're hearing about it here now. Okay, does anybody else watch movies?
Is it okay? Is he in grade?
That they're gladiators. When we're talking about gladiators, that's what I'm thinking of. The gladiators, the gods and goddesses that you see. Somebody was talking about Percy Jackson, and I totally geeked out because I love Percy Jackson. It's so amazing. So when we're talking about these things, you can think about what you know. Somebody brought up the movie 300. Miss Paula got really excited when we said that there were half-naked men in it. So they're greased down, and that's sometimes what we think of when we think of Greece. Sometimes you think of the warriors.
Yeah, I mean, that just relates to a form of jail. The Greece you talking about it's related to a form of jail. The people grease themselves.
No.
Warriors want to
They didn't necessarily grease themselves down, but they had a lot of sweat because they're in Greece, and Greece is hot. It's a really humid climate, very humid climate. So when you think of movies like 300, when you think of movies with gods and goddesses, you sometimes think about warriors. So we're going to watch a quick video, and this video will hopefully help you guys add to this. Let me get a quick snap of this. Okay? And when you think of what they had, oftentimes we think of the royalty that they had, and we're gonna experience a little bit of that as well today. So let me get this movie queued up. I got through the Comcast guy that constantly has his commercials up, so it should be ready to go. If you want to take some notes, it might help you. Remember on the midterm how many of you were looking at that last question going, I don't know. Well, it was because we had talked about things and you had additional resources that you could have pulled from. So when we were asking about gender roles in ancient Egypt, we had talked about that, guys. So we had talked about that, but we had also looked at some pieces that dealt with that as well.
Well, Miss Warren, can you correctly relate Greece, like in the Bible, because like you got warriors that fought like as a goddess, like me, like you have a lot of warriors that fought the same way as me, so it wouldn't be too much of a difference.
Remember when we're talking about this information, most of this is BC, so that's before Christ.
Right.
So if we're relating that to the Bible, this is kind of like Old Testament stuff. So there are some relationships and some parallels that we can draw to that. If you were to think of gods and goddesses in Greek and Roman culture, think of them as these entities who they gave things to and who they tried to please on a regular basis. If you were thinking about that in the Old Testament, think about these people who said, idolize me, you should worship me.
Right.
So think about, if you want to relate it to the Bible directly, think about that relationship amongst the two. So let me get this queued up here. Hopefully it's working. And I want you to pay really close attention to not only what you hear, but what you see as well. Jess, can you hit that light for me? Okay. Probably have no mute.
This great icon, standing heroically on the Acropolis alone against the sky, dominates the city of Athens today just as it did when it was first built over 2,000 years ago. This is the Parthenon, and today it is the symbol of ancient Greece. It stands for everything that world has given us: democracy, philosophy, literature, art, architecture, science, and sport. It is a beacon of culture and civilization.
Okay, so we're just going to start there, and I want to draw your attention to a few different things. So as we're looking through this, let's pause it and talk a little bit about each piece. So when we're looking at this structure, we're in Athens, or this is in Athens. So we see this structure kind of risen above everything else. You see a little bit of water out here. Not a lot of water, but a lot of these structures. What do you think these structures are over here? They're houses, okay? Houses and different types of buildings. So this structure kind of stands out above all of those other pieces. So let's move it forward a little bit. So let's just talk for a moment about the music that's playing. What is that music meant to do for you? Meant to draw drama. Drama. We're going to continue with that. So we've got drama. Let's make a note of that. We've got drama over here. And we get that from the music. up just a little bit. When we're looking at this area, we see that it's risen above everything else, and it draws us into that a bit more closely.
It was probably like that because if you're going to have your capital, your ruling part of the town, you're going to want it to stand out, so it's probably out there and watch everybody.
So how do you think they got it up this high?
Build a staircase and got stuff up.
Okay, how do you think they got this whole structure up?
Most of the structure was probably there. They probably brought the rest up there.
Okay, why is everything else lower than that one structure?
Because it's meant to stand out.
Okay, so how do you think they got it to stand out like that?
They found it and then made it look more.
So it appeared there.
I don't know. Maybe built it.
Jason, what?
They built it.
Okay, and what do you think they used to build it?
Stones or part of the mountain.
Okay, so it's probably a part of a mountain that they then use that mountainous area, and then they build it on top of that. Good. So then we see this structure, and even though he looks really big compared to the structure, if you look at people over here, a lot of these coliseums are going to be huge. So they're huge structures, they're huge formations. What color are these structures?
Okay.
They're kind of a tan color. We're going to talk more about that here in just a minute. Okay, now let's get back to the drama. So look at this guy. The wind is blowing in his hair. He's looking forward. His eyes are squinted. What is this meant to do? The flag is flying in the back.
Maybe adventurer, patriotic.
Okay.
He's like a warrior.
So when we think of Greek culture, the focus here is to make us think of royalty, to make us think of the Greek culture as very dramatic. His hair is blowing back in the wind. That doesn't happen naturally. So his hair is blowing back, and he's really focused on what is ahead. So when we think of Greek culture, the goal here is to get us to think about looking forward, but also this regality about him. So he looks very regal and very dramatic.
This great icon stand.
So he calls it a great icon. He's using language that emphasizes that these things are grand, that these things are really big.
Standing heroically on the Acropolis alone against the sky dominates the city of Athens today, just as it did when it was first.
Okay, so let's scooch back just a little bit here.
This great icon, standing heroically on the Acropolis alone against.
So let's look again at this structure. Now that we can see it from a little bit farther away, what is all this that's surrounding it?
Maybe a wall in the Colosseum.
Why would they have a wall in a Colosseum?
Battles and protection.
Okay, so the Colosseum, what kind of things happened at the Colosseum?
Plays and.
Okay, plays, entertainment of sorts. What other kind of entertainment?
Combats.
Killing people. Did you get that from school again too?
No, from Troy.
Okay, so maybe the movie Troy. Good. We're going to talk about that this week too. So there are a lot of battles that happen, but there's also, hopefully, some artistic elements that happen there as well. Good. What about this wall? Why would they need a wall?
Keep people up.
Good. To protect this structure. Even though the structure is elevated, it's pretty highly elevated. Even though it's elevated, they wanted to protect it. So this is another layer of protection for this area. Good.
The sky dominates the city of Athens today, just as it did when it was first built over 2,000 years ago. This is the Parthenon, and today it is the symbol of ancient Greece. It stands for everything that world has given us.
So he just said that this is a symbol of something. So what does he mean by it's a symbol of something?
It represents the culture or
Good. It represents the culture, and he goes on to say it represents everything. But it's a big dilapidated tan thing. Is that really, that's what the culture is, dilapidated and tan?
No, but they were the first ones to make the concrete that it was made out of,
Okay. So the structure itself does bring in a bit of this is what it stands for. And when we're talking about these structures, we're also talking about how grand they are. So Greek culture is very grand. Good. So let's listen to what he's saying, and if you take any notes, this is a good thing to take some notes on.
Democracy, philosophy, literature, art, architecture, science, and sport. It is a beacon of culture and civilization.
Okay, so he said a lot. So what is he saying about Greek culture? What is it full of?
Sport.
Okay, sports. What does he mean by sport? What do you think he means there?
like the Olympic type sports.
Good. So we get those Colosseum battles. That idea of competition. Good. What else? Is there anything else there?
Religious.
Democracy. So let's go to democracy first. So democracy is what? Let's talk about it in general. We don't have to identify what it is specifically.
Something where everybody has some say in it.
Okay, it's a system of government in which people have a say. So this introduces the idea of government. So it's not just you kill somebody, you get their stuff. Remember Hammurabi? He wanted to kill everybody, right? So he wanted to kill a lot of people. Or if you did this to royalty, then you ended up eventually dying. So it introduces a system of fairness in the government. So people actually have rights. Good. What else did you hear him say? Jason, what did you say?
Religion.
Religion. Good. Anything else?
Art.
What?
Art.
Heart.
Art.
Art. Art. Let's put that up here with drama. Good. Anything else? He talked about the art and the architecture. So he was talking again about those structures. Let's play it again, see what we can add to it. So if you don't already have this written down, then you probably need to write this down.
And for everything that world has given us, democracy, philosophy, literature, art, architecture, science, and sport.
So now we can add
Literature. Science.
literature,
Philosophy.
philosophy, science. Now when we think of Greek culture, we don't always think of science and the scientific contributions, but there are a lot of scientific contributions that we're going to add to this. Good. So let's start talking a little bit more. Let me write for a second. About what the Greek culture brought to the rest of the societies. So in order to do this, watch your eyes, guys. I'm going to turn the lights back on. In order to do this, you guys are going to be working within your groups, and we're going to look at some additions to the Greek culture, some beginnings, and some things that they brought to us. We're going to focus on a couple of these things. So as you're reading this, remember you need to annotate, take some notes in the margin of what you're reading, and don't answer the questions until after we've talked about it. So I want to talk about it before we actually dive into the questions themselves. Make sure you put your name on this, and then as you're reading through, annotate. So take some notes in the margin as you're reading. Remember that we are out of here at 3:45 today, so you guys don't have a lot of time left to do this. So work through this. You're turning it in today.
Why are we out here at 3:45?
I have a very important meeting. It's going to help educate you even more. And you're really quick at this, so you'll be fine. I have planned this accordingly. You need the what?
Russell, Sergeant Russell, he's come back here.
So don't answer the questions yet. Just focus on reading and annotating. And then we're going to talk about it. Some of you are getting much better at taking notes. So once you're finished, just stop and wait for the rest of us. We're going to talk about this together. Oh, you did it. So read the next one. Yes, many. So you're going to have to put some to the side. That's additional. But you're doing just okay. Make sure you So remember the things that we underline or circle include what?
Dates.
Dates,
Names.
places, stuff we don't understand. Make sure that you're making marks around those things. So this is kind of like heads up, 7 up. So once you're finished, put your head up so I can see you, so I know that you're done.
Just reading it or
Just reading it.
Go ahead and do the second.
Just hold tight for just a second. Okay, let's talk about each of these paragraphs one by one. So we chunk that information as we're reading it, and then we can write ourselves a quick summary off to the side. So the first paragraph is really focused on the origins of Greece. And remember, the thing we want to remember here is that when you're going up in dates, the numbers get smaller. So it says that it dates back to the beginning of the 6th century, but it started in 1100 BC. So 1100 BC was further back. So the numbers get smaller, and the last hero is Alexander the Great in 323 BC. So that's closer to our time. So BC, the numbers get closer, and that's closer to our time. It was located in the southern portion of Europe. So I like to circle on the map. It's really, really tiny, and it's difficult to see. So I made a note there. What other things could you highlight in that passage? What other things are important besides the map?
The date that he died.
Okay, the date of Alexander the Great.
Like it just yeah. This says that he was the last hero kind of thing.
He was the last great hero. Good. And confirming that is the first question on the back side. So it says, whose death marks the fall of ancient Greece? Well, you can't just say Alexander the Great. I need a complete sentence. Remember those sentence starters that we talked about earlier this week and last week? So Alexander the Great was the last great leader, and his death marked the fall of ancient Greece.
What does that mean?
Wouldn't that be what? No, it's not a copyright.
Compound.
Oh, compound sentence? It could be. You write it.
Or you're like
Subject verb.
And different.
So make sure it's a complete sentence. So back to the front side. We're following the emergence of the first dark ages. So there are some things that we learned from that paragraph. What is the most significant stuff to pull from that paragraph?
Around 800 BC, Greece began to form groups of city-states.
Good. So we get the idea of the city-states. Now, what in the world does city-states mean?
It's like their little countries.
Okay, So think of Greece as this country, and previously they did not have towns or cities within each of those areas. So think of city-states as Kokomo, Indiana, in the U.S. So Greece is the country, and there are regions like Athens is a big state, and then you had smaller areas that were within that. So in those city-states, they had some problems. And what were those problems from? Why couldn't they have one government?
Mountains areas.
The mountains. So the mountains is kind of like, hey, I'm the president and I'm standing here and I'm going to control this area. But then there's a mountain that separates me from another area, so I can't really control them. So they ran into problems because of the region, because of the physical layout of the country. Good. Anything else from that passage, that paragraph that we need to know? It was what?
They consider themselves independent states.
Good. So these states consider themselves now independent of everything else.
So how was it separated?
There's mountains everywhere.
That's the physical separation. But they divided into what? City-states. Different city-states. So before you guys answer those questions, I know you're itching to answer the rest of those questions, let's go over the last paragraph or the last couple of paragraphs because that will help you because it does go into those pieces as well. So the third paragraph there focuses a lot on what?
The
what? Okay, it brings in the religious aspects, so the gods and goddesses. What else?
It was a tumultuous.
Tumultuous?
Yes.
Good. So it was a tumultuous place. What does that mean? Difficult. Good. Rough. And why was it rough?
Always having community.
Okay, there was constant war going on. So it's kind of like if within Indiana, we have Kokomo fighting with Marion, fighting with Lafayette, fighting with Indianapolis. We're all fighting amongst each other. So it's not going to work very well if we're trying to get something to run, if we're trying to cross different areas. Think about families as well. So think about families that try to maybe marry off into another town. Well, if the towns are fighting, we're not going to be able to marry and procreate and do what we want to do. Good. So as a group, I want you guys to finish answering the next few questions. Remember that it needs to be complete sentences. So don't just give me one or two words. Give me a complete sentence. And you can talk to your group about it. Talk to each other. So did you guys get how they were separated?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Very well. Okay, so let's look at the questions on that. So how is it separated?
Other distance of the mountains made apart.
Okay, so we're on.
Basically, I put
The terrain was
like what you said,
one challenge faced by the
city-states.
Okay, so they were separated between city-states and what challenges? So the next question is more about the challenges that were faced. Okay, so the constant state of war. Polytheistic.
Like,
Do you think that created a challenge for the leaders?
yeah.
Okay, why do you think it created a challenge for the leaders?
Because they said that with that polytheistic, it means that like that all gods and goddesses were in control of many of aspects of life. I mean, so basically, that could create like some type of like distinct between like because like not all people would think the same thing. I mean, I feel like not all people would just think that well, okay, this is just because he's a god, and just because people feel like he a god or he a goddess that he's in control of many aspects of our life.
Okay.
Or they could be like, well, if this God is mad at us,
It's not my fault.
Good. Yeah, that works. So it can be as simple as the challenges are mountains. It can be more complex as constant fighting, and it could be even more complex as the gods who are taking over, or the gods who are in control. Good. Make sure whatever you write that you are supporting it. Okay, so what about the author? He said that also done that. So what do you think of that?
I was born nuclear.
And what made it different?
There was lighting.
So as you guys are thinking specifically about the last question, make sure you're thinking about the impacts that God and goddesses made. So if God and goddesses were in control of things, what kind of things were they in control of?
The sun, rain.
Mother Nature, yes. So they're in control of things that people cannot control. So the idea is that the gods and goddesses are the ones that don't allow, they cause a flood because they're mad. So we can't control those things. Good.